Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story mix. Today we got some reports on overdoses. An overdose can play out in a lot of different ways and can mean a lot of different things for each different substance or each class, as we'll see here today. These reports are intense, some pretty concerning, and ones I'm sure you'll enjoy. Let me know what I should cover next, and without further ado, let's dive right into this.
Somebody could have died. I'm sure I almost overdosed. All names have been changed for anonymity. Before we start, I'd like to say I do not condone anyone follows in my footsteps. I regret most of everything from this time period, and it looms over me often. Do not make the same mistakes, and be safe. The day started out normal, picked up some friends, and headed out on a sunny day to have a good time. We got a lot of weed and went to hang out at a friend's house in the late afternoon. One of the people in the group thought it was a good idea to trip that night, and everyone agreed. The only problem was we didn't have a place to trip, so they opted to trip in my car. I drove a minivan at the time, and there were 7 people wanting to trip, including me. I just so happened to have had 7 seats in my car, so I obliged, not really thinking of the consequences. The plan was this: we would go grab the acid and find a good place to park up for the night. Simple, right? We did a lot of drugs that way. Pick up, park up, and have fun for a couple hours. But this would be the first time tripping like this, with this big of a group. We also didn't have any water, which will come into context later. Ryan bought the acid for everyone, since he always boasted about being a high roller. They had the cat from Alice in Wonderland on them, in a trippy design. We had no way of testing it, but to be honest, that really wasn't on our minds. We were just excited to trip. Everyone but me had dropped their tabs. 3 people on 1 tab, 2 people on 2 tabs, and another had taken 2, but dropped a third later when I dropped. As they were waiting for the come up, I was still looking for a place to park up. Then someone said, "Why not the library?" Which seemed like a pretty good idea. It was out of the way and very dark. I had climbed it a couple times late at night and had never seen anyone drive by it. By the time we got there, it was about 1 a.m. I dropped my 3 tabs as soon as we got there, about 20 minutes after everyone else had dropped. 15 minutes later, and I couldn't stop laughing. It hit me super fast, and I felt as though I had somehow just synced my trip with everyone else's. Instead of come-up anxiety, it was all just giggly butterflies, and everything was just funny and great. I remember the first visuals I got were kind of like neon laser lights. Kind of like a neon sign you would see in the window of a building, but instead of a neon glow, it was just a neon laser. They were an overlay on reality, and it didn't seem very acid-like, but I didn't think much of it at the time. My friend Tyler started looking like a fucked up clown at this point, mainly because of his hair. I hate clowns, but it wasn't scary, because I knew he was just having a good time, like I was. As we were coming up on the peak, I remember vividly a feeling I thought of as my brain twitching. Have you ever seen a pic of a brain made out of turning gears? Imagine something got stuck there and they were twitching back and forth, trying to break free of whatever was stuck in between. Looking back on it, I'm pretty sure this was me feeling my brain bleeding, as it is a symptom of overdose on 25I. But I thought this was me just tripping too hard at the time. I'll never know for sure. I remember the visuals being very intense as well. Not like your normal psychedelic visuals at all. Think about being able to see clear as day, but also seeing particles fall. I don't know how else to describe it. Ever have a piece of hair on your eye and watch it kind of fall? At around the same time, one of our friends, Taylor, had thrown up. I'd assumed she was just really anxious due to it being her second time tripping and didn't think much of it. As the other girl in the group, Haley, tried to calm her down, Ryan started freaking out because he felt he was responsible for her not doing so great. So I took him to the middle of the parking lot and thought I might have a little fun. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. I told him to look at the moon. I told him to keep looking. Just keep looking, I repeated a few times over, and then I spin him around to Taylor and the vomit on the ground and said, "You completely forgot about that, didn't you?" And he was amazed at the fact that he had forgotten about it, and for some reason, it cheered him up. At the same time, Tyler was feeling queasy due to Taylor throwing up, so after I cheered up Ryan, I went over to him to see if I can do anything. He said he would be fine, and I went to check on Taylor and Haley in the car. It was at this point we realized we didn't have any water, and that triggered everyone to feel dehydrated. Luckily, someone found a monster and we passed it around, which seemed to quench our thirst. We were all tripping so hard, but none of us had any auditory hallucinations, oddly enough, which LSD commonly does on even a tab or two. This should have been a tell that what we were on was not acid, but the night continued on. After a while, maybe about 4 or 5 hours into our trip, Taylor asked me to use my phone to call her father due to her having a bad trip. I asked if she would be okay with that, as she was in fact tripping pretty hard, and most parents would not be okay with that. But she said he had told her she could call him if she was ever in this kind of situation. So I obliged, hoping he could help her through whatever she was going through. Sadly, this wasn't the case. About 3 minutes later, I hear her give the exact location we were at and everybody's names that was there. I knew exactly what was going on immediately. She had called the cops. She later told me she did this because I looked like a demon and looked like I wanted to kill her, when I didn't even really talk to or look at her throughout the trip until it turned bad for her. The next thing I knew, there were bright headlights pulling into the parking lot, and 3 police cars and an ambulance showed up. Everybody got their vitals checked almost immediately, and while this whole thing was happening, they were questioning all of us one by one, me being the last one to get questioned. They seemed in disbelief about the dose I was on and how I was coherent. I specifically remember an EMT saying to me, "I don't understand how your brain isn't melting right now," and another cop insinuating I wasn't on acid, but I brushed it off in denial, as I was just experienced. I would like to know that we had asked them for water multiple times, and they never gave us any water. Very shitty in my opinion. But I digress. Taylor gets taken in the ambulance, and everyone else gets taken home by the police. Except for me. I had to stay behind while they towed my car and impounded it as evidence, and they told me I could walk home, which was the next town over. I had my phone, Juul, and $6 on me for some water at a coffee stand before the long journey home. After all of this, I called the police department multiple times about my vehicle and when I could pick it up, even leaving a voicemail on the cop's phone who impounded it and never heard anything back. Finally, I called and someone told me to call the tow company to get it back. When I got it back, it was covered in tape residue and was completely trashed on the inside, even had a broken door. I ended up getting rid of it almost immediately due to the tape residue not coming off regardless of what I tried. The side door wouldn't close for the life of me. It was also very old, and I was thinking about getting rid of it anyway. Overdose at school. Okay, first off I should say I have a prescription for Adderall, but I never took it until this day. I woke up about 6:30 a.m., groggy and tired as usual, and got ready for school. Out of the blue, I decided it would be a good idea to try my prescription. It had been prescribed 2 years prior, since I had been struggling concentrating at school. I found the pill box empty, and remembered that I had refused to take them before, and flushed them down the toilet. It had expired a couple months back anyway. My little brother also had a prescription for Adderall though, so I decided I would just take his. He actually used his. I read the label, and it said take 2 in the morning, so I figured I'd take twice that, since I weighed almost exactly twice as much as them. I took them about 6:45 a.m., and about 10 minutes later, my mouth was extremely dry, I felt out of breath, and I got the chills. I wasn't bothered by this at all, but suddenly a friend of mine, M, had wanted me to give her some pills so she could focus at school too. I put 20 in a Ziploc bag and got a ride from my carpool to school shortly after. I met up with Em at about 7:30 and gave her the pills, and I went to first period, where I sat next to her. My first period was a joke, so we just talked instead of actually listening. During our conversation, she brought out that you can get high if you take more than you're supposed to. She ended up giving me 10 of the pills and keeping 10 for herself. Midway through first period, at about 8:30, we both went to the bathroom and popped 10 pills each. The original symptoms I had earlier came back with one additional effect. My hands started shaking slightly, like you do when you get the shivers. I thought nothing of it though, and continued on with school. By 10:30, lunch had started, and eating was the last thing I wanted to do. I felt too weak to walk around, so I lay down by my next class, waiting and breathing heavily. An hour later, I was in third period, and I started to get uncontrollable tremors. As I was sitting down, my legs would shake violently. My Japanese teacher asked if I was sick and told me I could try to sleep in the back of the room until I felt better. 90 minutes passed, and I was still shaking uncontrollably. My hands turned blue, and I could not move or even feel them. At this point, I was a little worried, just because everyone around me was so concerned and seemed so freaked out by my condition. I slowly walked to the next class, letting everyone feel my hands on the way. They were very cold, and I still couldn't move them. At the beginning of fourth period, we have a block schedule, so that was my last class. Some of my friends convinced me to talk to the teacher because my arm was blue up to my elbow and I could still not move my hands. The feeling was like I forgot how to move them. It felt exactly like when I had a heat stroke a couple years earlier and I forgot how to use my whole body from the neck down. Learning how to walk again was a bitch, but thanks to intense physical therapy, I was back to normal within a few months when the doctors had told me I would never be able to walk again. Anyways, back to my story. I went to the nurse's office where she took my pulse and temperature. My heart was racing and my temperature was a little above normal, but I felt freezing. They asked me if I had taken any medicine, and I told them I had taken Adderall for the first time, but I had a prescription and that I thought I was just having an allergic reaction to it. They called my aunt, who picked me up around 2:30 p.m. At this point, I was still having tremors, my arms were still blue, stomach still hurt, and my legs still could barely hold up my weight. My aunt drove me home first, so I could show my doctor exactly what I took. Oh shit. I knew it was illegal to take someone else's prescription, so once I got home, I said I couldn't find it. She bought it, and we left to go to the hospital. During the time I was in the car, I threw up about 10 times. This was the worst I ever felt in my life. Once I got to the hospital, the doctor ran all the normal tests and pumped my stomach. I told my doctor I had taken 4 pills, and the reason I said that amount because I knew there was no way it's pointing taking 14 when it says take 2. He then looked at me with surprise and that the most he'd ever prescribed someone was 2 pills a day. By far the scariest part of the whole experience is when I had to give a UA and my goods had shrunk to extremely small size. I was so worried it would never return back to normal, yet too embarrassed to ask my doctor if it would. I had to wait for all the results of the test to come back before they let me leave. By the time I left, all the symptoms besides the dry mouth and stomach ache had pretty much disappeared. Later that night I called Em to find out she had also thrown up many times as well, but didn't have as bad of a reaction as me. I asked my doctor later about this, and he said it was probably something to do with body fat. I'm an athlete, and my body fat is only 5%. Both me and Em did not eat or sleep for 4 days. She lost 15 pounds, and I lost 10 in that same time.
Speedy with music enhancement. The other night I found a bottle of the SSRI Zoloft. I found info from various websites, what this chemical does to you, how much to take, etc. Normally I don't take Zoloft. At around 9:50, I took one 50-milligram pill of Zoloft. I downed the pill and went out with my mom to do random shit. Got lunch, returned some clothes, etc. I noticed around 45 minutes to an hour later, when we were in the car, I started getting much happier than I was the previous 2 days. This doesn't mean I was euphoric, it just means that I wasn't sad, angry, mad, or anything. I got home and I decided this was just the feel of it. At around 1 p.m., I downed 4 more pills, a total of 250 milligrams in all now. Within, I'd say, about an hour, I was very jittery, which I still am 6 hours later. I had a little difficulty focusing, but then I realized the fun. I closed my eyes and got some awesome closed-eye visuals. I opened them and stared at the window with the sunlight coming in, and I closed them, and I suddenly saw a large, bright-colored, intertwining square, due to the window panes, I'm assuming. It is now 4:30, and I just began to eat something, but suddenly I became struck by a nausea that was very agitating. I went to the bathroom and threw up what I was eating. But now, here's the cool part. Even though I didn't like throwing up, I didn't hate it. It didn't make me mad or agitated. Nothing really. This feeling of emotionless is kinda cool, but very odd. I do feel happy, not euphoria like I said before, not even a well-being, but the previous 2 days have been extremely stressful with SATs and an incident at a friend's house. With the Zoloft, it was gone. I don't feel that pressure or weight. It's very peculiar. Another thing is my body feel. I feel slightly different in terms of body weight, the way I feel when I'm just coming onto a DXM trip. My thoughts are basically the same, except very fast. I'm guessing that this is some sort of stimulant in one way or another, because my typing is about 2 to 3 times as fast, and I'm doing small things that I normally don't do, such as tap my finger against the desk or shake my foot. One last thing that I'm noticing is that music is affecting me a lot, without my knowing. I'll explain. About 2 minutes ago, I was playing Oat, Splitting an Atom, which the music, I feel, sounds like an end to something, like a conclusion. It's almost depressing. Well, without my knowing it, made me slightly unhappy, which I just picked up on. I changed the track to Infected Mushroom, Spiritual Trance, to see if I get slightly amped up, and if my idea of the music affecting me is correct. 9 minutes later, yes, I was right. It is very powerful. I feel almost immortally strong, I think. I'm getting slightly nauseous again, not sure why. My eyes are immensely dilated, but not bloodshot. Closed eye visuals are still present, and I'm getting tracers of bright lights. I feel unbelievably hyper. I read today that Zoloft stays with you for a few days, but I'll wait it out and see if it wears off. I don't plan on taking Zoloft again. I'm feeling slightly depressed. I'm trying to fend it off and get happy. I don't want to crash like fucking Adderall. I feel tired. I want to get to sleep, but I don't think it's gonna happen for a long time. I'm not sure why, but I think somehow I hit the peak just now, 7 hours later. My thoughts are different, but not amazing. I'm starting to feel lonely, but I don't want to be. Zoloft is very powerful and very potent, not something to be fucked around with. I don't particularly like it because I have that I'm gonna be like this for a while feeling. Well, I'm gonna go. I hope my report was helpful, but I don't think I can ride anymore. I feel like I'm about to crash. Afterward, 2 weeks after trip, I had a strong pang of depression because I let bad thoughts get to me, but that was soon washed away after I finished riding. I'm not sure if it was after effects or the come down of the trip, but for the next few days, I still felt it in my system, fairly strong, but waning every day. Sometime last Friday, it was completely gone. I had way too much trouble sleeping. It's like a cross between low-grade acid and speed. I do and I don't recommend it. It kept me up for 2 days straight, and my eyes were dilated to full dilation for 4 days. Very weird body buzz, and easy to get depressed, but very impressive for the closed-eyed visuals, although no open ones. It's got its downsides, so it wasn't really my thing. Think I'll stick to DXM. Smiley face. The worst evening. It was the spring break of my senior year in high school. Our jazz band, in which I played the less than important auxiliary percussion parts, remember the corrugated fish in grade school music class, went on a trip. Recently, I experienced a stress-induced insomnia and resulting psychosis. After a visit to a local psychiatrist, I went to Kmart with my grandmother to get my prescription filled, lorazepam, 1 milligram dosage. I had taken 3 of these capsules with me in case I had trouble sleeping. The first night passed without incident. On the second evening, 3 friends and myself We're hanging out in our hotel room, watching The Simpsons. We were supposed to leave to watch another jazz performance. I'd had enough of jazz for one lifetime already, so one of my buddies said he'd stay behind with me. Good enough. After The Simpsons concluded, I felt an impending sense of boredom. I decided to cut the evening short by taking all 3 of the lorazepam tabs, a triple overdose, and dedicate my evening to nothing but a deeply medicated sleep. I asked my friend if it was cool if I just crashed for the evening. It was only 5:30 at the time. He had no objections, so I dropped the pills and waited patiently for my well-deserved escape from the day. Funny how plans can change. Right before I slipped into my placid escape, a knock came at the door. It was our band teacher. "Everybody downstairs, we're leaving in 10 minutes. My eyes widened. "Wait, can't we stay here?" I asked, unsuccessfully trying to hide the panic in my voice. He simply shook his head and disappeared into the hallway. Uh-oh. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that taking 3 times the recommended dose of a sedative and then venturing out into a public place against your will can have some unwelcoming effects. This, in combination with the fact that I was emotionally depressed to begin with, made for one deplorable evening. The most noticeable effects took place about a half hour later when we arrived at the festival. When trying to step off the bus, I nearly fell. My balance was so off that I couldn't walk without stumbling. I'd once drank 7 ounces of scotch on an empty stomach in school and still been able to walk a straight line, so this was a very frustrated development. My vision was distorted. It looked like I was watching the world through an ancient home video, only getting every 3rd frame. I felt drunk and disoriented, a unique feeling for which I can provide no comparison. We arrived inside the concert hall. The upbeat music echoed from the stage, pounding in my ears and only adding to my confusion. When I felt I couldn't take any more, I got up from my seat to take a walk and collect my thoughts. This, too, did not go as planned, since I just ended up getting lost on the wrong floor. After walking circles and getting nowhere, I finally sat down on the steps. I felt so overwhelmed that I began to sob openly and uncontrollably. An onlooking Good Samaritan witnessed this pathetic act. She walked over and sat down right next to me. Not what I needed. "Are you okay?" she cooed. I made no response. Just a little side note, if you see a teenage male crying like an infant with a diaper rash, chances are he's not okay. "Is it about a girl?" I shook my head slowly. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," was all I could muster. She finally got the hint and returned to her group of friends, who were staring hard at me by this time. How utterly humiliating. After several more lost minutes, as well as odd glances from security, I finally made it back to my seat. I spent the rest of the evening wallowing in suicidal thoughts and despair. All in all, one of the worst evenings I've ever had. Upon reading this, do not assume that lorazepam has no value as a recreational drug. I once took 4 milligrams in my house and had a great trip, with lasting euphoria and excellent visuals. As with any drugs, stay in a controlled environment, take your current frame of mind into account, and be careful. Think before you leap. Although I have a soda or 2 a day, I have ADHD, so low doses of caffeine calm me, if anything. The past couple of days, I have been eating very little and sleeping horribly, and for short amounts of time, which probably had a bit to do with the agony of my experience, especially since I normally have extremely healthy sleeping patterns, and I have a normal appetite for a 15-year-old. Yesterday, I woke up at 1:30 in the afternoon and went across the street to hang out. At midnight, we went to Denny's to play Dungeons and Dragons. This was a Thursday night, and I do community service every Friday morning from 8 to 11. I knew we'd be there for a long time, and I wouldn't be able to get some sleep. My cousin's friend obsessively carries around caffeine pills, which he is extremely generous with. So I asked him for 2 at about 1 in the morning. I had taken 1 or 2 once or twice before, with no effect whatsoever. So after popping these 2, I asked for 2 more to keep in my pocket for hospice later. After about 45 minutes, I felt nothing, So without saying anything to anyone about it, I pop another 2 pills. Big mistake. Very soon, I start to feel it. I can only describe it as this bizarre feeling in my bones that just screams, move, 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 move. So I was fidgeting an awful lot, and if I wasn't so nauseated, dizzy, and confused, I'd be running all over the place. I had to go to the bathroom an awful lot too. I urinated several times each hour, all night and day. Also, thank God nobody else was there, because I had horrific diarrhea. I had no idea my body could hold so much, especially after eating so little. And I have irritable bowel syndrome, and I have had some horrific stomach pain. Let me make this perfectly clear. This was the worst stomach pain I have ever had. It felt like there was something inside of me, squeezing my intestines. My hands started shaking a little, and I got pretty scared. I would zone out frequently and got the chills, then a fever, and sometimes both at the same time, all over, or sometimes part of me would be cold, another part hot. I felt the intense need to concentrate on something, anything. So I started to draw one of my favorite little original comic characters to draw. I couldn't focus, and my hands were shaking so much that he looked absolutely horrible. Circles in reasonably straight lines were impossible, no matter how slowly I drew. My sense of time got a little weird. Like, after ages of D&D, I'd look at the clock, and not even 5 minutes would pass. But I'd go to the bathroom, piss really quickly, and it would have taken 10 minutes. Sometimes the minutes jumped by, other times they dragged on. It was bizarre. Eventually, it was 5 a.m. We paid. I was hopping in fucking circles, squirming, darting my eyes all over the place, paranoid as hell. When we got into the van, I struggled to sit still, but my body was way too exhausted to squirm like a 5-year-old. Then, when we got out, I ran across the street to my house, down the 4 stairs to the bathroom, because if I got there a second later, I would have shit my white pants. Then, I was absolutely exhausted from my little run and struggled to catch my breath. Afterward, I struggled up the 4 stairs and into the garage to go on Google and try and figure out what to do. See, at this point, I had taken my temperature, which was 101 degrees, and being the wimp I am, feeling like I'm burning to death when my temperature is 99 degrees, I felt horribly. I seriously felt like I was dying. The fucking devil was squeezing my intestines with razor-sharp fingernails. My head felt like it was going to burst, and I was paranoid as all hell, darting my eyes around and making sure there wasn't an axe murderer in the room. I found nothing on what to do, except for emergency information. I was hoping to find out what I could do to make myself more comfortable. For instance, was it safe to take medicine? Should I eat, sleep, or what? I felt like absolute shit and needed to kill some time. So I decided to take a shower, putting it to the hottest temperature possible, which was incredibly relaxing, and cleared my sinuses, making it a bit easier to breathe. Then I put it on the coldest and stayed in there for about an hour. I left the shower, taking my temperature again, and it went down 2 degrees. I still felt like I was going to die, just not as much as before. I was still nauseated, but my bowels were empty as could be, and I was drinking a lot of ice water. I got so dehydrated and whatnot. I lounged around nude in my bedroom for about a half an hour, my body aching too much to do anything. Again, with a warped sense of time, it felt like 3 minutes, and then it was 7, and I had to start getting ready. I still couldn't force myself to eat, but I did whine to my mom about how horribly I felt, and she promised to pick me up at 10 instead of 11. I work in the kitchen, and for the first hour we sat around waiting for the patients to wake up, and the nurses to give us their orders. My legs hurt too much to stand, but sitting caused me to nod off. Conversation was like fucking rocket science due to my lack of attention span and overall confusion. Again, fucked up sense of time, and soon an hour had passed. By this time, I had taken my pulse. Usually it's about 85 beats a minute. It was 108. I would walk 3 feet to the other side of the kitchen to get milk out of the fridge and be panting. My breathing was very slow and labored, partially due to the tremendous efforts not to vomit, but mostly because I was horribly out of breath. My face became flushed. I visibly looked like shit. Not as horrible as I did about 4 or 5 hours ago, but I still looked pretty bad. Almost as if by a miracle, I made it through those 2 hours without dying. I signed out and waited a minute for my mom. We went to Home Depot and I waited in the truck. I never knew that sitting in a truck with a nice, cold air blasting could produce so much sweat, or make one be so out of breath. I got very paranoid again, wondering if I was going to die, pass out, or what. I decided I would pass out, not be able to breathe, then die. My mother came out with what she needed, and some beef jerky, and a Coke for me. Then she remembered I was sick because of the amount of caffeine in my body, and felt like an idiot. The jerky just made me more hungry, but I was too nauseated to eat when I came home. At this point, it was 10:30. I took the pills at about 1, then 1:45. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't breathe, due to my clogged nose and my overall exhaustion, and I was extremely hungry. So I sat downstairs and ate the jerky. My conversational skills had improved significantly, my sense of humor returning, and my speech became slightly more relevant to the topic, but still not very much so. But my speech patterns are usually a little irrelevant, are hard to follow. My bones were aching, and my body cried for sleep and more food. My mother, out of pity, took me to Publix for nasal spray and sushi. I frequently made her stop so I could catch my breath, and I was still flushed and sweaty. About 45 minutes, 15 squirts of nasal spray in each nostril, 7 pieces of sushi, and 1 ice-cold shower later, I went to sleep. It was about 1 p.m. at this point. My fever went down a little, but I otherwise felt horrible. The minute my eyes were shut and my head hit the pillow, I fell asleep. 4 hours later, my mom woke me up to tell me some good news. I went downstairs, grabbing my Coke from earlier and my remaining sushi. My hands were shaking, and I was too weak to open the bottle. The sushi made me feel better, but I had a throbbing headache. It's 9 p.m. now. I've eaten 3 bites out of a package of microwavable lasagna since then. My breathing is a little bit abnormal, and my heart's still a little bit fast. My fever is 100 degrees, and I'm painfully nauseated still. I'm still working on that bottle of Coke, but I've drank 3 bottles of water in the past 4 hours. I go to the bathroom almost literally once every 5 minutes. The devil's still squeezing every last bit of fecal matter out of my intestines, but thankfully I haven't vomited yet. Well, I did a couple of times, just a little in my mouth, but that doesn't really count. My hands are still shaking, and I think I'm going to need another cold shower. I'm going to sleep shortly. I'm struggling to stay awake, typing this. I'm still sort of confused, and my normally impeccable typing skills are pretty shitty. It took me an extremely long time to gather the concentration to write this. I'm not sure if the bizarre feeling in my bones is a compulsion to move or extreme fatigue. Reading up on caffeine, it's pretty clear that tougher people than me, with more experience with sleeplessness, caffeine, and not eating regularly, can get pretty fucking sick from more than 250 milligrams of this shit, and it seems most do it because of the misconception that legal equals not absolutely horrific in excess. Also, many people don't know how much is too much. Like me, I had no idea that caffeine could make people so sick. I'm pretty proud to say I've survived this. Haha. It really did toughen me up a bit, and it's kind of made me appreciate my health a lot more. It strengthened my position that nobody should take any substance without a wealth of knowledge on it, and preferably a mentor of some sort who was experienced with it, especially stupid-ass teenagers like myself. I have never smoked or taken more than a sip of alcohol. I've taken a couple of my mom's painkillers or muscle relaxers with her permission whenever over-the-counter stuff didn't do the trick, and that shit would get me 3 sheets to the wind. Granted, I've always been extremely curious about certain psychoactive drugs, mainly for their mind-opening abilities. Any temptation has been temporarily squelched because of my caffeine gone wrong experience. I've learned I don't have the knowledge our maturity to use any mind-altering substance quite yet, and that the effects are not fun at all. I did not even enjoy the positive effects before I came crashing down. I will never touch a stimulant again, with the exception of the occasional soda, especially for the purpose of staying awake. Next time, I'll try something a little healthier, like doing some freaking jumping jacks or drinking some cold water, which works an awful lot better for me.
Grand mal seizure. Not fun. This incident took place last Thursday night. It was one of those events that removes the divide between your secretive hidden life from the life you portray to others, like two worlds colliding in an instant. And after it's over, you better hope you have a good character to fall back on after you lose your blanket of lies. Anyways, this was one of those. It sucks ass, by the way. I have recently obtained a prescription for Wellbutrin SR 100 mg tabs for a major depressive disorder that I've struggled with for who cares how long. I've discontinued Prozac for no good reason. It worked fine, but I heard bupropion could give you a buzz, being on a dopamine and norepinephrine, is that right, reuptake inhibitor. These are pleasure transmitters. Yay. I take Adderall XR in addition for ADD, but mainly because it can fuck you up. But that's a different story. This is what happened. On Thursday morning, we had a snow day. When I have nothing to do, I get into trouble. It's just how I am. I spent the morning at my neighbor's, snorting cocaine and feeling cool. That night I was in my room and had no high whatsoever. And so reality had sunk in, and due to my major lack of coping skills, I had to get high again. Any kind of high. All I had was Wellbutrin. I popped 5 or 6 100 milligram tabs and waited for about half an hour, and felt nothing. I went to eat dinner with my mom, and soon enough, I started to feel pretty good, and told my mom, I feel pretty damn good. And then, everything goes black. I awake roughly 10 minutes later, in the kitchen sitting in a chair. Someone has their hand in my shirt, and I assume it's a weird dream. It becomes apparent there are 2 EMTs crouched next to me, putting electro things on my chest, and about 7 firefighters surrounding them. I don't know what to think. I was very, very frightened and very, very disoriented. I remember yelling, "What's going on?" incoherently, and my mom telling me I had a seizure and explaining to the paramedics what had happened. It was very bizarre and strangely horrifying. It was the lapse in time that I found particularly disturbing. I was escorted to the ambulance and was hysterical at the idea of being taken away. The ambulance seems to scare me more than being put in a police car. But yeah, I was freaking out. I was hooked up to the monitor and all that, and away we went, en route to Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. My heart rate was roughly 180 beats per minute, pretty damn high. The paramedic put an IV in, which hurt like a bitch. I was asked all sorts of questions about my meds. I explained that I abused all of them, yada yada. It was no fun. At the hospital, I was wheeled in on the bed, and felt like a lazy bum and insisted on walking, but they weren't having it. I got my own room and spent some very strange silent moments with my mom and little brother. Finally calm enough to ask what the hell just happened, I explained my long hidden Adderall addiction to some relief, with my mom being cool about it. They took some blood, gave me a CAT scan, and some funny looks, but no lollipop, which really pissed me off. The blood showed traces of cocaine. Busted. Now all my meds are regulated, and my relationship with my parents is very strained, but getting better. I was unconscious during the seizure, but being told what it was like was heartbreaking coming from my little brother. He wrote me a long letter begging me to get off drugs because he loves me, and it just tore my fucking heart out. It's been a miserable week. Bupropion should not be fucked with. Of course, neither should any pharmaceuticals. Grand mal seizures are very, very scary. It is now a haunting experience and a valuable lesson. Peace.
Massive overdose with hallucinations. I am prescribed this medication for anxiety at a dose of one 160 milligram tablet 3 times daily, which my doctor said is already a very high dose. But this day, it wasn't working. So I decided to take 3 capsules, then another 3 capsules a few hours later. The setting of this experience was alone in my apartment, which would play a huge role, and my mindset was one of anxiety. After a few hours, this drug began to have a delirium effect on me, similar to dimenhydrinate or diphenhydramine, 2 drugs I occasionally use to see real hallucinations. I am no stranger to true-to-life hallucinations and delirium. However, this day I had taken no drugs, which I thought would cause these effects, and I was not expecting to trip at all. So when I was standing in the bathroom and saw hands curl around the door, I thought someone was in my apartment and went to investigate. I discovered 2 robbers were in my house playing games with me, hiding behind doors, etc. One was even inside my fridge, which of course is impossible. But this is what deliriums do, I guess. The drug also began to have its prescribed effects on me, such as lowering my heart rate and blood pressure to very low levels, which caused me to fall over repeatedly, putting a huge gash in my head. I decided to call 911 after a few hours of these robbers and their antics. I told them that there were home invaders in my house and that I needed help. They were very professional when they arrived, and of course, saw nobody in my house, just me covered in blood and terrified. It was only after they searched my house for 10 minutes that I became aware I was hallucinating. At the hospital, after putting the stitches in my head, the doctor told me that this is actually a possible effect from beta blocker drugs due to the loss of blood to the brain. I had to use a wheelchair at the hospital the entire time because I could not walk or even stand up without passing out. It's worth noting that had there been a trip sitter around to tell me that what I was seeing was not real, this probably would have been one of the best trips of my life. The hallucinations were identical to the ones I get on deliriums. However, of course, if one is looking to trip, a massive overdose of beta blocker drugs is just about the stupidest thing one could do. So please, don't do it. The doctor told me people have died overdosing on this stuff. Sorry for the poorly written report, but I felt like this had to be said.
Accidental overdose. It was a Sunday evening, and I was looking forward to a short experience which would obviously not interfere with my work the next day. I had no previous experience with 2CD, so I decided that this was a good time to test the substance. After checking various sources and possible dosages, my mind was set on a 30 milligram experience. I also considered 40 and 50. The drug recipients are all labeled with popular name, trivial chemical name, structural formula, and concentration for liquids to reduce the risk of taking in the wrong chemical. Despite all of this, I later discovered that I did, not much unlike the 100 milligram report of 2CB and Peakle. It is all the more frightening as I now recognize the many warnings and signs that manifested themselves even in an early stage, which I neglected and led to this incident, which luckily did not end in disaster. Medical context: ADHD with medication. Substance context: had several experiences, mostly with psychedelic drugs. 22 hours. I ingested 30 milligrams of the compound I held for 2CD. I remember the taste to be bitter, not quite good, but not repulsive. It reminded me strongly of 2,5-dimethoxy-4-methylamphetamine, DOM/STP. The dilution was 2 milligrams per milliliter, which seemed also slightly off as I remembered that the hydrochloric salts of the phenethylamines didn't dissolve very good, but I couldn't quite remember it well, so I dismissed the feelings as uncertainty, driven by my own bad memory and the possible confusion with the closely related DOM. 22 hours 20 minutes. Early signs. 23 hours 20 minutes. I marked this point as start of peak, which seemed reasonable for 2CD. There was also a feeling of leveling of intensity. 23 hours 20 minutes to 24 hours. Euphoric phase. There was a profound self-appreciation, almost erotic. Music was superb. I lied down on my bed and watched the lights move wildly with the music. At one point, I couldn't make the difference anymore between shadows and real objects. There was also considerable leg tremor, but it felt particularly pleasant. A printout of a tesseract projection came out in 3D from the paper and started moving and shifting in impossible ways. I began to worry about the intensity, which was not at all in line with common reports for 2CD. I again noticed a close resemblance to a previous experience with DOM/STP, which was also very intense. I notify a friend on the internet about the unexpected intensity, but he was not online. 0 hours. Instead of leveling, the intensity kept rising again. Worries increase. I was lying on the bed when it started. I had an extremely intense jamais vu experience, which suddenly set off panic. Certainty dissolved almost instantly. Instead, I turned into a paranoid being, trying to make the fear go away with logic and self-comfort. Somehow, it still worked, and I could enjoy brief moments of music, light, and mathematics. I decided to try to contact my friend again on the internet, still online. As I was typing, I needed all my effort to focus since the visual distortions were at this point so intense that it was nearly impossible to observe any object longer than 1 second. 10 minutes. In just 10 minutes, the intensity grew so overwhelming I started panicking. I was torn apart in doubt, fear, and shame because I was now certain that something was definitely wrong and somehow this 2CD was not 2CD at all. Yet, I felt a strong resistance to call for help, still hoping it would go away. Instead, hope slowly evolved into hopelessness and desperation as I began to fear for my mental health. There was also a very weird headache coming on, something I have never felt before. 15 minutes? My mind was now set on calling for help. This didn't work very well, as it was very difficult to handle my phone. I was shaking a lot, and it was difficult to remember the exact steps to find a phone number. It is very hard to describe what happened next. The closest I can think of is the scene in Terminator 3 where the Terminator is infected with a virus and is torn apart between destroying and protecting Connor. I felt this way. My mind started the commands to find the number in the address book on the phone, but the commands were wrong and aborted over and over again. Call, abort, call, abort, call, abort. At the same time, I felt the limit of what one would call utter desperation, and I narrowly sank onto my knees, crying, ready to yell for help, and the feeling that I was having a mental breakdown, or worse, full-blown psychosis. My mind seemed to short-circuit and thoughts were multiplying, even louder, faster, and I just couldn't handle it anymore, and then, nothing. 20 minutes. I don't know how long I was out or what I was doing, but I was still standing with my phone in my hand in the hallway. I had a clear moment and quickly called the number. X. Hello? Me. X, I'm glad to hear from you. Wait a second. Going outside. Don't wake the housemate. Me. X, do you think 30 milligrams is a good dose for 2CD? X, 30 milligrams is a very good dose for 2CD. Me. Still, this is crazily intense. I feel very anxious, and I think I might have not made the brightest decision to do this alone. I'm totally dissociating and... X, do you want me to come over and bring clonazepam to stop it? Me. Yes, that would be good. X. Okay, can you remember your house number? I seem to have forgotten. Me. Thinking. No. Panic. X. Okay, me. Wait! I remember it. It's number. X. Okay, hang on. Don't do anything stupid. I'll come as fast as I can. Knowing that help was coming, I thought I could ease down my feelings, but I couldn't. Music was distorted and echoing. External voices seemed to multiply. Television was heavily distorted and scary. Even the news, telephone games, and cartoons. I could feel losing grip again and was fearing that X might come too late. 12 hours, 30 minutes. I wake up my housemate and tell him what happened. He kept me company and eased me down. I'm glad I made this decision and very grateful for his help. I'm looking at the clock like every 5 seconds. Time seemed to move at different speeds. I feel extremely detached and I'm experiencing ridiculously strong derealization. 1 hour. At last, bell rings. X rushes in immediately and gives me 4 milligrams of clonazepam. By that time, it was nearly impossible for me to tell if what was happening was real or fantasy. I'm ordered to the couch and I ask X to explain to my roommate in detail and coherently what this is all about. I also tell him that I'm now practically sure that I must have gotten the wrong chemical, still not considering the possibility that I just took the wrong bottle. Anxiety fades, but the psychedelic effects are still as intense as they were. To the great amazement of X, I suddenly seem very clear, prompt, awake, and I could walk around easily. 4 milligrams clonazepam should have put me vastly asleep. 1 hour 30 minutes. X now also thinks that something might be seriously wrong. We go upstairs and I give instructions on how to get to my stash. I lay down on the bed for safety. I knew the bottles of 2CD and DOM were untouched before the start, so it was easy to check. First bottle. X. 2CD, it's still sealed. Me. Crap. Quickly look for the DOM. X. DOM. It's open. Me. Fuck! Me. Shit. What have I done? Me. Don't we have to call 911 or something? X. Don't be so quick. Get down on your bed and take this. 6 more milligrams of clonazepam. X. Are you sure about the dose? Me. Check my notebook. It's all there. X checks it out. 30 milligrams. 2 milligrams per milliliter in the book. 2 milligrams per milliliter in the bottle. 2 hours. Still no sleep. Visuals still very intense, but there is no more anxiety. 8 hours. X checks out. I continue sleeping. 18 hours. I wake up, total train wreck. 1 day after, barely functional. 2 days after, I try to go to work, I feel psychedelic on the road, and there is still the headache. 7 days after, 30 minutes. Exactly 1 week after the mental breakdown, almost down to the minute, I have a bad panic attack and feel the same weird headache as 1 week ago. Next weeks. Several panic attacks per day, about 3 to 10, sometimes quite intense. Severe memory impairment. Some things go smoother though, such as improvising at the piano. About 1 month later, applied very small therapeutic dose of 2CB, 4.5 milligrams. No problems, no panic. 9 months later, I have done several more psychedelic experiments. I'm now much more prone to anxiety during come-up, but it always turned out okay. Every now and then I have slight panic attacks, but they are manageable. I do consider myself as intelligent enough, yet it was my own stupidity and negligence that led to this situation, which may very well have led to my death. No discussion about drugs go by or my mind wanders about what would have happened if I would have chosen the 50 milligram experience, or if the mistake was between 2CB or DOB, or what would have happened if X was not there. I cannot thank you enough for this. I'm not ready to leave the psychedelic experience yet, and I do not consider this DOM overdose as useless. Instead, during the come-up, it has shown me a view on the potential which is now, as I write in this text, just barely opening up to let me in. It has also shown me the other side, the side of myself that I did not want to see, the limits of what I can bear, and the face of utter desperation, which finally defined my true self in a way I cannot predict.